Thanks everyone for taking some time out of your day to hang out with me while I present probably the most important talk that I will ever give. Side note, this is also probably one of the most boring, non-technical. If technical is your forte, this may be boring, but it's a conversation that needs to happen. So with that being said, I really hope that your ears are wearing seatbelts because I'm about to take them on the ride of their life. So I had to get the joke in. Here comes my obligatory I've got a face made for radio joke, just to keep the attention on the slides. Let's go ahead and get started, shall we? So about me, I run training through the OSINT, but with that being said, starting in January, I will be teaching a little bit more primarily for Antisyphon. But today we're going to talk about social engineering. The material from this course is actually part of a passage from the book Practical Social Engineering. I am working on the companion course to this. It will be called Applied Social Engineering to avoid any copyright or intellectual property issues with course titles and people. But with that being said, we'll just go ahead and get started. So, standard disclaimer, the thoughts and opinions in this presentation do not reflect those of my employers, past, present, or future. The objectives, we're going to talk about some current general metrics associated with Infosec in general. Then we're going to pivot into some social engineering specific metrics. And then we're going to have some problems with metrics. I'm going to introduce and apply some new metrics, give you some analysis models, and some food for thought for potential future integration. So when we talk about metrics now, I've listed a few here on the screen. We've got password metrics. The standard password length is this. The most reused password of insert year here is this. All of those things. We've got breach metrics. On average, a breach has how many victims within it? How catastrophic was it? What kind of information was breached? We have response metrics, which goes into dwell time. How long did the adversary hang out undetected before someone found them or they made their presence known? And, being kind of managerial for a moment, we always have to look at the ROI, the return on investment. What other InfoSec metrics can you think of that are valuable? Phishing fails. Yes. Closed tickets. Oh, failed password attempts. Honestly, that metric shouldn't be over 2 or 3, to be entirely honest. IPs blocked. Yeah. These are all metrics that some manager somewhere thinks that it's a good idea to actually look at. And in some cases, there's value to it, but with anything intelligence related, and I do operate very heavily in the OSINT and the social engineering worlds, which OSINT itself, the acronym includes the word intelligence. Social engineering realistically is nothing more than human intelligence. And let's just be honest here. All of InfoSec, whether you're offensive or defensive or whatever, you're doing some form of intelligence. And as we look at the conversation going from data to information to intelligence, if you don't provide the due context around it, every metric that we could possibly provide is useless, right? Failed logon attempts, okay, that's absolutely useless unless we say, okay, well, we're seeing them from this IP address at this time of day, coming from this ASN or this domain or this or that. That's providing something with some context around it so that someone can actually go and act upon it, to keeping with the lingo of intelligence, to assist with decision making to do this. Successful logon after failed logon, absolutely. So when we talk about password metrics, that could be length, complexity, or age, right? That's nothing too far out of the blue. In this breach, the average length was 9 characters. The complexity had 2 typefaces on average. There's all sorts of things that we can do with this. But honestly, that's kind of worthless. With breach metrics, we're talking about the number of assets in the breach. How often did we experience password reuse? The number of breaches, the ratio of users in breaches. When you're talking about an organization, If I'm doing an engagement for an organization and I go and I roll up to have I been pwned, or have I been pwned, it's not going to give me a whole lot. But looking at something like dehashed, for example, okay, well, you say that you have 500 users. You have 330 of them in this data breach. 30 of them no longer work there. So 300 people are in data breaches that work for your company. That is an actionable metric, because that gives you something to work with to say, these are the people we need to watch. We need to nullify these passwords in general. Response metrics, yeah, you're getting into the mean time to respond, the number of incidents. That's going to get into tickets closed, time to escalation, all of that fun stuff as well. The dwell time, we talked about that before being detected, whether that be voluntarily or involuntarily. The ROI, that's the ratio of your expenditures versus your forecasted or perceived losses. So when we talk about social engineering, and I apologize, I didn't catch the earlier talks. I had some stuff I was working on earlier. But with that being said, oftentimes we get wrapped up on how many people open the email, how many people click it, how many credentials were stolen. And we might do averages or a ratio of opens, clicks, and stolen credentials. But, realistically, that leads us to a problem. What is the problem that I'm getting at? Does anyone have any ideas of the problem that I'm leading into with this? Humans are not the problem. In fact, with social engineering engagements, I will tell you, a social engineering engagement, while you are hitting the human element, you shouldn't be testing the people. You should be testing your technology and your processes. If your security team cannot build infrastructure resilient enough to handle someone clicking a phishing email, they have no business calling themselves architects, and they need to go a little bit further. I mean, Joe should be, you should click on every email I send, because honestly, I will never send an email, or I will never send a phish claiming to be me. I will always go as someone else. If nothing else, it'll be Dave Kennedy. Or in this case, I'll send emails from John Strand. But no, the problem is those metrics, they really don't measure much of anything. They stroke the ego of the tester, and they give a manager something to, more often than not, from my experience, browbeat their employees. You fell victim to this phishing test during this pen test. It's your fault that we got compromised and we lost PCI accreditation. No, it's not their fault. Because honestly, everything should have been handled from a technological perspective. And for things that got through, there should be something, a process in place to handle reporting of this. So emails are meant to be opened. That's why measuring opens is useless. It's pretty close to garbage, because with a good subject line, it's going to get open. I will tell you, I've been using ChatGPT left and right to create engaging subject lines, engaging social media posts, and all the above. And I didn't even have to tell ChatGPT that I was doing a phishing test. All I had to say is, I work in HR at insert company here. Write a convincing, concise subject line. And at that rate, it's going to get open. And if you do the right thing regarding what you are working on in terms of the domain that you are doing this from, that will make it even harder to detect. Sometimes, in terms of opens, if they have a preview pane, that may flag an email as opened anyway. Honestly, a lot of training platforms, they fall short on detonating links. They say, oh, yeah, there was a link here. Okay, what was it to? Was it to Grabify, which I do use quite heavily, or was it to something actually malicious? And there are third parties that do it, but the third parties, honestly, I'm not trying to totally take a dump on them, but oftentimes they are solely there to meet a compliance requirement. They may mean well in terms of enhancing the security posture and conditioning the employees, but more often than not, they are employed for the purpose of some compliance framework says, thou shalt do this. And that's why they do it. And honestly, most non-tech folks, they use the same password or a slight variant. I mean, just as a reminder, we are coming up on a seasonal change. So everybody that's using summer 2023 exclamation point or some variant thereof, you might want to get ready to use fall or autumn 2023 exclamation point. But that's why the metrics that we are talking about, they're kind of worthless. So when we worry about opens, that encourages punishing people for opening emails, right? And to that end, you don't want to punish people for doing their job in a best faith effort. It also encourages naive people and sometimes problematic employees to use this to avoid work. Yes, that is a slippery slope, but what I'm getting at is you've got an employee that's already trying to avoid getting, they're already trying to get out of doing work. They're kind of slacking pretty heavily. Oh, I didn't open that email because it looked like a fish. Well, if someone can open an email without fear of punishment, then that takes that excuse away from them. And that also, it doesn't accurately address risk, because if every single phishing email had malware that simply opening it would activate it, yes. But the thing is, you have a lot of email security providers out there, the proof points, the abnormals, and the Iron Mail or Mimecasts out there. And then you have the other side where Google and Microsoft are doing things as well. So you've got a lot of different things. Plus, you've got to factor in, depending on the operating system, if they wrote it for Intel architecture on a Mac and someone's using an M2 chip, which is running ARM architecture, it ain't going to work. So you've got that. So that's why that's kind of useless. I will admit that clicks are more relevant than opens, and it does test the human. But honestly, if you have defense in depth and you have good architecture, you have good monitoring, you have the systems hardened, that should be a very minor risk. Yes, there are things that can possibly come through and create problems. Yeah, I get it. But you want to filter out as much noise as you can so you can focus on the signal. And if you have that defense in depth, caring about clicks is a minor risk. Because honestly, these should be a test of the technical solutions in addition to the test of people. Managers often miss that point. Macs do have browsers and 365 accounts, and it is possible to do things with browsers and 365 accounts. But the reality is, if your threat model dictates that you're looking for a strain of malware or ransomware that's going to target the actual operating system, and it's written for Windows, it's going to be null and void on a Mac. And it is possible to attack the browser. That is absolutely a possibility. And to that end, that's when you exercise defense in depth and you have content filtering, you have web filtering, you use things like sinkholes, pie holes, things of that nature. You have an allow list of acceptable browser plugins. You have certain browsers that are allowed to be used and not be used. You have a secure configuration. So that still takes out, it's not Sheila in accounting's fault that she clicked on something if she was not provided the training for it. If she was unsure about it and the organization has a culture that would punish her for asking the question, that's not Sheila's fault. That's the company's fault. And I would say that to the CISO to their face. Like, I would choose violence that day. When we talk about stolen credentials, that's predicated on failing to have a password policy. That's predicated on not having multi-factor authentication or password managers. And honestly, it does lead to scope creep and illegal activity when people target personal accounts. As a matter of principle, I will not target a personal account. I know the adversaries do it, but tell me this. When is the last time you saw an unrestricted DDoS attack or an unrestricted ransomware infection in scope for a pen test or a red team engagement? I'm sure someone has seen it, but more than likely, no. That's my point. We don't do everything that the criminals do. We are emulating malicious behavior up until a certain point. I will tell you, if any of you worked for a pen testing company and you actually was contracted by my employer to do a pen test and you targeted my personal accounts, What happened to the physical pen testers at Coalfire when they decided to do a physical on the court in Iowa will be child's play compared to what I will try to bring up legally. Because my employer does not own my personal accounts. They do not have the authority to authorize that within scope, period. So caring about stolen credentials, whenever I do tests, I don't even give the credentials. I may say, okay, well, these passwords should be denied. No one in your organization should use these. Or I could say, hey, the following people need to change their passwords. I won't say this person has this password just because I have no assurance that a manager is not going to misuse that. I have no assurance that it's going to be protected. Someone could go incredibly sideways with that. That's also part of the reason why, unless you verify the actual account, Troy Hunt will not share anything on Have I Been Pwned with you. He doesn't care if you can do a domain verification or not. That's just not going to happen. So the TLDR of this is organizations often put the burden entirely on non-technical employees. From a management perspective, I don't care that Erin in management, whether she can click on things or not, I would prefer her to be more security conscious and security aware. But at the same time, as long as she gets all the blockers removed from the work that I'm trying to do and keeps everything on track, I'm happy. As long as Sheila in accounting keeps me getting paid the prescribed amount or more at the prescribed interval, I'm happy, right? They fail to see that technology can help mitigate the problem, but they won't entirely solve the problem. And honestly, organizations, when I worked as a consultant, if you work as a consultant, you already know this, consultants, our whole job is to tell people their babies are ugly. And a lot of organizations don't want to hear that. And they fail to admit their own shortcomings. You say, hey, here are the findings in the report, and you immediately get a rundown of but, here's why. And all of a sudden, they have their mitigations, the mitigations that don't exist that are getting pulled out of thin air. So here are the metrics that matter. And I'm going to start with ratio. Open to click ratio. That one, it's minor. I don't really care too much about it. Open to action. That would be downloading a file, inputting credentials, or doing something else that is not in the user's best interest. Open to reporting. This tells us how much lead time we have to get ahead of this, right? Whenever I oversaw security on a government contract years ago, I told all the employees, if you click something, you're not going to get in trouble. Report it, and you won't get in trouble. That way, I had as much time as possible to be able to respond to it before it had the chance to spread. In some cases, some things could have just spread. Yes, I get it. But the more time you have, the better. This is based on the concepts of Winn Schwartau's book, Time-Based Security. You can find it on Amazon. It's a short read. It's great. And basically, the concept of that book is you don't have to have like Fort Knox level defenses to protect every single attack forever. You need to have enough defenses in place that they can contain an attack until you are afforded the time to detect, triage, and respond to it. That's it. And I'm seeing that someone fishes their users to train them to report so that they get reports of the real fishes, that they don't care about the click rate. That's a very novel concept, and I actually really like that. So continuing with these metrics, click to action. Since from the time they click the link until they put in their credentials or downloaded something, how much time did they sit and think about it? Because if this were a vendor talk at Black Hat, I would be talking about shifting left. But we're not at Black Hat and I'm not a vendor, so we don't have to worry about that. But same thing, click to reporting and then action to reporting. I had a user come and say, hey, I feel really stupid, but I input some credentials on this website. Here's what I put in. And then some weird stuff started happening. And when they told me that, I was like, all right, unplug it from the wall. I'll come get it. And that was that. And that was the end of the discussion. There was no punitive matters to it. You also have, this is just getting into the opens, the clicks, and the action. But basically with the ratio, how many people that opened it clicked it? How many people that clicked it did the action. And really, once you know how many of each, it's really easy to put those together. And I mean, it affords you the ability to understand which departments and which teams need additional mitigations or additional training. So when we talk about distance in this concept is time. So this is the one that's dealing with how much time do I have from the time someone opens something until an action is performed or until they report. Because at the end of the day, the goal of this should be to get people to actually report. Obviously, you don't want them to act on it at all, but at the same time, you want them to report. Whenever I oversaw the security on the contract, I went and I bought scissors and I zip tied them very loosely to network cables. And if you've ever worked with the US federal government, they're very sensitive about the colors of network cables. But I would not use black cables because it's kind of hard to see under some people's desks. And I ended up using yellow. And those of you who have been in that situation, you know that yellow means something. And this was a purely unclassified contract. The auditors came in and they lost their mind. And I explained, hey, yellow sticks out. And also, we have two people on this contract that are colorblind, and yellow was the easiest color for them to be able to identify. So what I did as well is the scissors were zip tied to the network cable, but I also had, if you were ever in the military and you know about the bomb threat worksheet, I had one of those laminated with a grease pencil stuck to it as well. And basically what that was like a bomb threat worksheet in the military is, who are you? Where are you calling from? What's going to trigger it? Why are you doing this? Blah, blah, blah. In this case, who sent the email? What time did it come from? What time did you get it? What did you do? Did you click any links? What website did it take you to? Basically, giving the IR team a heads up. That's exactly what it did. And I told people, if you feel comfortable unplugging the computer, go for it. If you don't, take the scissors, cut the cable. I can replace the cable. There's not enough voltage in it to shock you. And that was just that, because I did not want them to power the system down. I wanted to preserve the memory for forensic analysis. So that's why we did that. But basically, this right here gave me an idea of how much time we actually have to approach this. And as we talk about the distance metrics, we want to avoid the incident altogether, but we want to be notified as early as possible. We don't want Brian Krebs, the FBI, or a ransom demand to be what tells us that we've been infected. And this is talking about time-based security. We don't want to focus on complete eradication. You need to have your defenses that will protect until detection and remediation can occur. So how much lead time does the team have to enact incident response? And shift left. So what if you're a consultant? If you're a consultant, you are in an especially special position because you can provide even more value to your clients within the community. You can do per engagement metrics based on client only. You can heavily anonymize that or get it approved for release by the client. But basically what you want to do is say, hey, based on your performance, this is how you as an organization, you look. Or you can do sliced metrics across all clients. This particular type of engagement under these conditions had the following outcomes. Population metrics, you can get samples per client. So all engagements with a single client or the full population, all clients, all engagements. It's totally your prerogative with how you go with it. To that end, that is something. It's not at the level of, like, say, the Internet Security Threat Report that comes out or the DBIR that comes out, but it is giving something of value to the client and all clients in general so that you can actually say, this is the metric and this is how much you've been able to improve. It's really very similar to what I do with students that have taken the Intelligence Investigations People course. After a Trace Labs event, I will email students that have taken that course and say, hey, how'd you do? And I have metrics based on people who take the class and how they perform in competition. this is really no different. And to that end, you've got your basic statistic measurements. And within these measurements, you've got your mean or average, your median, and your standard deviation. And to that point, the average, that's your central tendency of a data set. You have the median, that's the point directly in the middle of the data set. In some cases, for very normalized data sets, it's going to be very similar to the actual mean. In some cases, it may be wildly different. And we could get into statistic discussions about, well, if the median is greater than the mean or is less than the mean, there's that. But you also have the standard deviation here, which is going to be the amount of variance between the data points within the data set. So when you're talking about things like time and you're talking about things like ratios, these are things that are numeric in nature. So because they are numeric, you can somewhat anonymize them to a degree. And to that end, you can also go further and really get good statistic measurements, regardless of the size of the organization. You could be talking about the mom and pop place that has 5 employees, or you could be talking about the IBMs and Microsofts of the world with over 500,000 employees. With these, regardless of the size, whether you're talking a mom and pop place with 5 or fewer employees, or you're talking the IBMs and the Microsofts of the world with 500,000 or more employees, you can still provide good statistic analysis to say, you know, you don't have a problem with people entering data in here. You have a problem with people who click it and never report it. So as a result, it is our recommendation that you foster more of a culture that would actually be more open to people reporting their security problems, right? Because at the end of the day, if somebody fears that they are going to get in trouble, they're not going to report it. Even if they may know in the back of their mind that someone's going to be able to find out anyway, and the outcome will be even worse. But if they fear that confrontation, they fear getting yelled at, they fear anything coming beyond that, they are going to hesitate to report. And that's why I'm a huge fan within awareness programs of incentivizing it. I won't say that I would incentivize the person who reports the most fish, but maybe the most clever fish, or the most unique fish, or the first fish of the month, or something to that effect. Incentivize it. Give them a cup of coffee. Let them park in their boss's designated parking spot for a day or a week or something to that. Because as much as I hate to say it, to the point put in Discord, the world runs on incentives. Being a manager is being able to understand someone's problems and have the conversation with them and make sure that their needs are met in a way that makes them want to meet the needs of the company. But at the same time, sometimes you have to manipulate those incentives. Some people are praise driven. Some people are financially driven. Some people are just driven to do the right thing for self-satisfaction. That gets into the things of social engineering when we're talking about the principles of persuasion, right? Likability, commitment, consistency, urgency, scarcity, social proof, all of those principles of persuasion. These are things that can work. A 25-cent raise for some people, that could be an incentive. My mom works very hard manual labor, and she is just as happy about her 25 cents raise that she gets as I am my 3%. And with that, if you understand what it takes, I mean, it could just be a pizza party. I mean, it could be anything for those incentives. But basically, yeah, I mean, challenge coins, mugs. This is as much a people issue as it is a process issue, as it is a technical issue, and then finally a cultural issue. And that's really what it boils down to. You've got a lot of different things that you could go with. It's a matter of knowing your organization, knowing the culture, knowing the people, and understanding how to manipulate those incentives. On a submarine, for example, surf and turf was a Sunday meal. It was always prime rib and crab legs. When you're deployed and you get a surf and turf on a Tuesday, you know something bad's about to happen. You're about to get extended on mission, or you're about to get some bad news about your port call. Sorry, kids, you're not going to Singapore. But what I'm ultimately getting at is something to show appreciation. I mean, I have jokes about the yellow sticky of appreciation, but I mean, it's one of those things that just make people feel appreciated, because at the end of the day, you want people to report, because if you are aware of it, you can watch their TTPs and you can go and take actions from there. With that being said, I will open it up for questions. So one question I am seeing from Discord: why OSINT? I gravitate towards OSINT because it comes very natural to me. I'm very inquisitive. I'm going to shift the slide to my contact info for anyone that's interested, so I'm not perpetually schlepping here. It comes very natural to me. I'm very inquisitive, and I've just learned several different ways to ask different questions to achieve different results with OSINT. And I really like the thrill of doing the investigation. I like the thrill of looking for the missing person, or finding out who this organization is, or who is behind this bad act that happened somewhere, or who is in charge of this stable of trafficking victims so that they could get brought to justice, something like that. I don't want to use the term, but really oftentimes it kind of feels like the thrill of the kill. Can you start from zero with OSINT? Jose, I'm going to pose a question to you. Have you ever used Google? Are you capable of using a web browser? Congratulations, you have done OSINT.